Hello, I'm Sean and this is the Mountains Garage YouTube channel. Today we're going to start the assembly process of a race Powerglide for a fast street car. So it's going to see street driving and some track time. That'll be important as we select parts to make a Powerglide transmission do things it was never intended to do. It's very difficult in this whole process not to throw the entire transmission away if you buy a case and a tail housing and a Super Duty pump and a high clutch drum and a lower gear set and a valve body and a band adjuster, and the list goes on and on. You're not going to use more than a handful of parts, if any. In fact, they sell you a little kit for all the pieces you might need. So if that's your intent, is to build a higher level Powerglide that I'm going to do, mine is going to have a stock case, an aftermarket Bellhousing, a stock pump, a converted stock valve body that I didn't do. I bought an iron valve body with a trans brake. I did buy a lower gear set because I didn't have a 176. I only had 182s, and I wasn't prepared to trust them at 500 or 600 horsepower. So because I have bought a gear set, my transmission will be rated much higher than that, probably around 1,000, limited only at this point by my input shaft, and other things we'll all cover along the way. So today it's all about choosing a case. Powerglides were built from 1962 to 1973. From 1962 to the end of 1966, they all had a rear pump. That was a thing back then, because when automatic transmissions started to become popular in the 50s, people were used to having to jump start their car. So most automatic transmissions of that vintage have a rear pump. And if you get the car pushing, you're making hydraulic power, you can technically spin the engine over and jump start it. By the end of the 60s, they disappeared forever, pretty much. I'm not aware of a current transmission that you can push start, automatic transmission you can push start. If they're out there, so be it. So because a majority of the 17 million Powerglides that were built have a rear pump, that comes into play when assembling the transmission or just choosing a case, because we have to modify the rear of the transmission for the reverse piston apply for the trans brake. You need to make the holes bigger that feed the reverse piston and also allow the fluid to release faster. So we'll start there, and I can show you a few other things that are differences in the case, and then we're going to pick one of these and I'm going to start hacking on it, because you got to start somewhere. And by the time I wreck two of them, I'll still have one good one. No, I'm just kidding. I'm actually going to take the worst one and use that. With the cases all in the downward facing dog position, let's start on the left. This transmission, if I can believe the casting that was on the side of the pan, the number sequence, the fact that it has a plastic vent, it's a 1967 and up transmission. I stripped it from what I believe to be original. It did not have a rear pump, which it shouldn't. In 1968, it did not. The casting is much nicer than the other ones I'm going to show you. This is a beautiful case, and any logical person would choose this one to build a transmission out of. This beautiful 1968 case does have the upper bolt hole now used in the LS style engine. I find that very unique. Chevrolet used this way back, and by 68 they weren't using it. This casting flash proves that it was never even finished, but in this molding process it was still there. If you happen to catch the couple videos leading up to this transmission case was the half transmission that I had. Somebody had stole the pump, drum, and gear set out of it, probably to rob the 176 that it might have had. And I got it, just had the valve body bolted to it and not much else. This was my first choice to modify because it's already been hacked off and it's the roughest. It wasn't complete. It is a rear pump unit. I didn't have any of the governor support or the rear section. I had none of that, but I'll show you in a minute why I know it's a rear pump transmission. It also has a metal vent, means it's 1966 and older, down to 62. I don't know what year it is. I've read that all metal vent transmissions had a rear pump. Hold the phone. Here's the third transmission I stripped yesterday, the nastiest of the three. It had a rear pump because I took it off, and it has a plastic vent. It has the upper hole that is 3/4 away machined on the other side, just not finished. This transmission case would clean up also. It's just, it's one of those oddities. It does have a plastic vent, but it had a rear pump. So the casting on both of these is certainly not as nice as this one, but not a factor. I believe I have read most instruction sheets of the major manufacturers of Powerglide trans-brake valve bodies. And in the rear of the case, they're all pretty much accomplishing the same thing. In a 67 and up non-rear pump Powerglide, this hole feeds your reverse piston. In all cases, this hole here intersects it. So with a trans brake, you're going to enlarge this hole and this hole. On a rear pump Powerglide, it still has the passage that you're going to enlarge up through here. That's universal on all of them. The size depends on how hard you want to hit the rear tires and the manufacturer of the valve body's recommendation. We'll get to that when I start drilling. But this hole is not all the way through. The reverse piston is fed with this hole on a rear pump Powerglide. So whether your instructions tell you to or not, mine don't tell me this, but I know this from years of experience, so you could easily be led astray. Maybe they're hoping it gets blocked off. I'm not sure of the plan. However, this hole needs to be plugged. I'm going to drill and tap it and put a set screw in there, or a grub screw, depending on where you are in the world watching my video. This hole is no longer going to go through to the reverse piston on the other side of the case. This hole needs to be drilled all the way through. It's already this size, so I can take a 1/4 inch drill bit and go all the way through, and then come in from the back side and enlarge it just to the intersect point with the bottom hole, not all the way out. It's going to intersect this hole here. So I'm going to make this hole bigger, punch my way through on this one, enlarge it from the other side, and then I can choose to either also plug this one now or cover it with the gasket. And the governor support, you have to use a non-rear pump governor support. They sell roller supports. They sell plates and gaskets. We'll get to that when we actually install it, but as far as modifications, this one needs to be plugged, and that one needs to be bored out. Here's looking at the non-rear pump Powerglide. I got my flashlight, and about 4 or 5 o'clock, whatever you want to call it, you can see the fly hole. That's the one we're going to be using. This one's all ready to be bored out and ready to use. No plugging of the upper hole because it doesn't exist. Here's the rear pump Powerglide case, and about 1 o'clock you can see the feed hole, and there's no hole down where we need it at 4 or 5 o'clock, whatever you want to call it. So that's why the upper hole needs to be plugged, and we need to make our own bottom hole. If you're wondering about this hole over here, let's talk about it. Most Powerglides, not all, have a pressure tap, so you could actually check the reverse apply pressure. All 3 of mine actually have it. This one had a switch in it, probably for reverse lights. In some of the manuals, there's a whole procedure if you want to drill your own, if you want to be able to either monitor or ever check this. Now would be the time to modify your case. Requires some simple boring and tapping, and you could put your own pressure tap in there. You're going to find most of them do have it. The rest of the case was pretty universal throughout the years. There was models that didn't have a cooler, so there'd be no cooler line plugs. They would have big holes in the Bellhousing, being air cooled. They made these that were manual valve body and didn't always have a plug for the modulator or a threaded hole. Some had a plug, some had just a casting with no hole. The cooler line ports are 1/8 pipe. I'm going to install a 1/8 NPT pipe fitting to -6 AN. Some people try to open these up to 1/4 inch pipe. The bottom is pressure out to the cooler. And from this side, it's a very small hole, and you'd be hard pressed to make it a whole lot bigger and still seal it with the gasket. I'm just going to leave well enough alone and not modify it. The 1/8 fitting will just be fine. It's a pretty restrictive. This is better than some. If I showed you the other two, it's actually more restrictive. And return, no issue there, but there's not a lot of meat. And this Powerglide cases with the stock Bellhousing like to split up around here. Here's a good example. The dummy transmission I have in the dot is split right down through that lower fitting. In whatever case I choose, probably this one, I'm going to knock the metal vent out and tap this 1/8 pipe as well, because I have an overflow tank I'm going to be putting on. So now is also the time to do that. This case needs a little more cleaning if I do choose it. A stock Powerglide had linkage all the way down from the carburetor to run this inner piece and control that to the valve body. No performance valve bodies use this feature anymore. I've never built a stock Powerglide, probably never will. I would never use this piece of linkage for anything. I guess some people weld the center hole, try to modify that. There's no need. All your shifters, when you buy one, come with linkage. This is for one of the early Hurst quarter sticks. I bought this mid-80s. It's been hanging in the package since then. Never had it out. I do notice some differences. This one had an adjustable linkage piece that bolted on, so you could get a little adjustment there. This is out of a more modern quarter stick, Hurst, and they just give you a round hole. Everything else is the same, but it's actually welded. This is a more universal one. It hasn't had any holes drilled yet, but it allows you to bolt on a piece of outer linkage without having to disturb anything inside. That's really handy, and this one I have with the universal holes, and I know one of these holes lines up with the quarter stick. I have a Hurst quarter stick to use, so that's going to be my first choice because it's much more universal regardless of the shifter I choose, but having to open up the transmission and change this piece of linkage would be a pain. Thankfully, they've thought it all out. See, the welded ones are fine. This is more modern. You'll find these more often, so that'll be my choice. They all have a linkage seal, larger than a Turbo 350 or 400, but a seal nonetheless to seal that much larger shaft that had to have a shaft internally. Most of the time they pop right out. On the nastiest transmission the other day while trying to get out, I opened up my hand pretty good. I was doing something dumb. I haven't forgave myself yet. I'm reminded of my stupidity every time I do that. I had my glove on, and my black nitrile glove took most of the force, but I stopped right there. The seal's still there. I'll deal with it someday when I feel like it. But what did John Wayne say? Stupid hurts. Well, I did something stupid I shouldn't have been doing, and it hurts. I will be installing this Ultra Bell that I picked up a few years ago. It's dated October 2017. So it's almost out of cert already, never been used. That's not a concern for me. It'll still do its job. I could have it recerted. Not a worry today. I may cut the bunny ears off. That is permissible. The JW instructions tell you you can. These are for Olds, Buick, Pontiac, Cadillac. I'm on the fence. I mean, it's a X amount of work to cut them off. If they don't interfere with anything, hell, maybe I could bolt the harness to them or wire tie a harness to them or something. So I don't like the looks of them, but for now, I'll leave them on there. The case, I just take my square, go across the pan rail, make a line. I'll go down through here with the Sawzall, and I'll angle in toward the pump. The Powerglide does not have the 3 raised sections that the Turbo 400 has. So all I have to go off is here. So about the width of my Sharpie, I set it on the pump and I trace myself around, and I should have about that much left to grind if I'm accurate with my cutting. So I don't expect it to cause any trouble. It is quite a few ribs to cut through compared to a 350 or a 400. They did a good job reinforcing the Bellhousing. Unfortunately, it just ended up cracking somewhere else. So with an SFI Bellhousing install, you've taken stress that was here and put it now in the bolts into the case itself. It seems to work out okay. It certainly doesn't cause any more issues anyway. In the plus column for a Powerglide, they all had 7 bolts holding the pump in from 1962 to 1973. So you're not looking for a special case with a certain amount of bolts. They all had 7, and that's what you get. And they're relatively evenly spaced out. They always seem to have left a void somewhere. I'm sure the engineers had a plan. I'm inspired to make a holding fixture to go from this ear to this ear with a round stub so I can actually put it in my holding fixture. It doesn't have the round indentations on both sides to hook anything to. I have the style that bolts on the pan bolts, so I guess I could use that. I might use that, but it's hooking into 5/16 bolts, but I guess maybe that would be strong enough. Out here I could use a substantial bolt, so we'll see. Right now, if you're working on a Powerglide, you chase it around the bench. The positive side, once I get this Bellhousing off, it's just a cute little piece. So I'm going to go in and eat lunch probably and start cutting. So I'll get busy on that. The next time you see the case, it'll be clean, painted, and ready for assembly. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in a couple days.